We're almost there. Just a couple more chapters left, and today, chapter 23, is a really short chapter. 3 Bags Full by Leonie Swann. Thank you for joining in on this most fun adventure of a murder mystery novel where a good shepherd is murdered and his flock of sheep set out to solve whodunit to their not-so-good good shepherd, whose name is George, and they realize along the ways of discovering who murdered George that he actually really was a good shepherd to them. 3 Bags Full. Chapter 23. Heather is right. Perhaps it all really did just seem to him like a trick, the spade, and all the upset in the village. Perhaps it seemed easier to him when he thought of all the confusion he'd be creating, Rebecca sniffed. The sheep had gathered round the shepherd's caravan the way they did in the old days, but there were no more Pamela novels now. Instead, Rebecca read big, rustling newspapers with very thin sheets. The wonderful thing about the newspapers was that they contained stories about George, about Beth, even about their own appearance at the smartest sheep in Glenkill contest. Another wonderful thing was that Rebecca sometimes knew more than the newspapers said, because she had talked to Beth, who had left Glenkill now to spend the rest of her life on an island doing good works. The story the sheep liked best was called Sheep Bring the Truth to Light. There had been a picture, too, showing the platform in the Mad Boar, and on it Maple, Mopple, Othello, and Zora, all of them small, gray, and without any scent, but unmistakable. Rebecca had held it right in front of their noses so that they could see it properly, and Mopple had tried to eat part of the newspaper. After that, she let them look at the pictures only from a safe distance. There was a picture of George with an unknown lamb in his arms, standing on the grass and looking very young and adventurous. Cloud claimed to be the lamb in the picture, but the others didn't believe her. Beth in a summer dress, young, too, and bright-eyed. A deadly romance, said the story that went with it. Corpse desecrated for love also showed Beth, but old, the way the sheep knew her, with a high-necked dress and a very serious expression. Rebecca thought about Beth a lot. She's been quite different since that evening, she said. I think she's the most romantic person I know. That evening, as the sheep understood, was the evening when 4 of them had taken part in the smartest sheep in Glenkill contest. They proudly raised their heads. They had done something vital that evening, even if they weren't exactly sure just what it was. The suicide business remained a mystery to the sheep. They couldn't understand why George should have done such a strange thing. George, of all people, who usually always said things in a way that a sheep could understand. Right up to the end, he probably didn't know what he was going to do himself, said Rebecca. Sometimes that helps me, imagining that up to the last he thought he'd really go to Europe, but then he went on a different journey. She swallowed and passed her hand over her wet, reddened eyes. Rebecca's eyes had often been red recently. But I know I can't have been so simple. He made his will first, so that, whatever happened, you could go to Europe. He was a good shepherd. He took Tess to the animal shelter. Hey! Chase! No, sir! Hold on, pause. Pause that thought. Chase! Leave him be! No, sir! Okay, my livestock guardian dog is cornering my bobtail kitten. All right. Right up to the end, he probably didn't know what he was going to do himself, said Rebecca. Sometimes that helps me, imagining that up to the last he thought he'd really go to Europe, but then he went on a different journey. She swallowed and passed her hand over her wet, reddened eyes. Rebecca's eyes had often been red recently. But I know it can't have been so simple. He made his will first, so that whatever happened, you could go to Europe. He was a good shepherd. He took Tess to the animal shelter. He wrote me the letter. Rebecca wiped a single tear from her cheek with her hand. She stared right through Mopple, who was standing in the front row of the sheep, hoping for a chance to nibble on that newspaper. An absent expression had come into Rebecca's eyes. She lowered the newspaper. Sometimes it seemed as if their new shepherdess suddenly forgot about reading aloud to them when she was in the middle of it. Then they had to drive her back to work. Heather and Maud bleated, a loud and penetrating bleat, and then Ramesses joined in too. Rebecca looked up and sighed. She opened the rustling newspaper again and went on reading the story of the lonely shepherd in the wide, wide world. When the Glenkill stories in the newspaper gradually became shorter and more boring, Rebecca went back to the book that had already impressed the sheep when she first read aloud to them. Now, in the light of day, the sheep could see what a lovely picture it had on the cover. Lots of greenery, a brook, mountains, trees, rocks. But of course, it was about humans again after all. A little uneasily, the sheep followed the adventures of a small flock of humans living on the moors. Their experience of newspapers had given the sheep a great respect for the written world in general. If sheep and humans can get into books so easily, then something can come out of books too, said Lane, and Ramesses and Heather began watching the new book suspiciously when Rebecca left it on the caravan steps after reading aloud. No one wanted to be suddenly taken by surprise with that wolf-like Heathcliff out of the book. But the book kept quiet. Towards the end, it even got romantic, with two ghosts wandering at liberty over the moors at last, the way they'd always wanted. The sheep thought of George and hoped that his own soul was wandering on some green meadow now, perhaps with a little flock that he'd found somewhere. One day, Ham came wheeling himself along the path through the fields. The sheep fled uphill in their usual panic. From there, they watched what was going on by the shepherd's caravan. Rebecca and the butcher greeted each other. "I hope she's not going to sell us," said Mopple. "She's not allowed to," bleated Heather. "It says so in the will." All the same, the sheep looked hard at the two humans. Rebecca and the butcher seemed to be getting on well together. The sheep never took their eyes off the butcher. He looked to them serious, wrinkled, and not nearly so dangerous now. Luckily, as a salty wind was blowing off the seas, they couldn't catch his scent. Heather came to the astonishingly bold decision to go and look at the butcher at close quarters. The amazed glances of the other sheep followed her downhill. "There's connections," said the butcher. "Connections everywhere. Transmigration of souls and all that. I read a lot these days so as to understand the connections. Know what I mean?" He turned his head and looked Heather straight in the face, half awkwardly, half curiously, and very respectfully. "Perhaps," he also nodded slightly, as if in greeting Heather was so surprised that she forgot to look fearless and just stared at the butcher in amazement. Rebecca shrugged. "Why not? They were with him for so long, I can well imagine that there's a little bit of George in the sheep." Heather gave the butcher a pert look and then trotted back to the others. A respectful flock of sheep awaited her. The butcher and Rebecca shook hands, and then to everyone's relief, the butcher wheeled himself back towards the paved road. Life could go on. And so it did. The sheep went to work as usual at dawn and grazed until late in the afternoon. Then they assembled around the caravan to be read to. Then there was more grazing until they went back to the hay barn. A well-ordered life for sheep. They liked to think of George and were grateful to him for the will. "He was a good shepherd after all," said Cloud. The sheep respected George's place. None of them would have dreamed of nibbling the herbs and grasses that grew there. Yet inexplicably George's place grew smaller and smaller. "It's because everything has an end," explained Zora. One morning, when the other sheep were still asleep, a round white blob slipped out of the protective embrace of the flock and made its way over to the cliffs. Mopple the whale stood in front of Zora's rocky ledge for a long time, thinking. Then he took a step forward, and another. Zora could do it. A third. Melmoth could do it too. 4, 5. He had looked the butcher in the face. 6. And Mopple was on Zora's ledge at last. He carefully lowered his head to taste the herbs of the abyss. More often than before, small groups formed as the flock grazed to exchange tales of their experiences. "It was a trick," said Cordelia. "No sheep may leave the flock," said Sir Richfield, "unless that sheep comes back again." "Sometimes being alone is an advantage," said Melmoth snidely. "It was a love story," bleated Heather, waggling her ears in triumph. And that was the shortest chapter by far, chapter 23, out of 3 bags full. I think we only have maybe 2 or 3 more chapters left. I think we only have 1 chapter left. So exciting. What book will we read after this? I'm really quite enjoying myself. And anybody who's joining in, I hope you're enjoying this really fun novel as well. From what I understand, this book has been or is being turned into a movie, as well as I also understand there is a sequel, a second book to 3 Bags Full.